Alrighty. Hey everybody, Alex here, and welcome to part 2 of my Final Fantasy XI history retrospective for me. As I said in part 1, if you haven't watched part 1, there's a link below actually. I don't know how many parts this is going to be. I am kind of shooting for 3 still at this point, but me thinking about it a little bit further, it actually may go beyond that. So, picking up from where we left off, I had a really cruddy summer job at the New York Circle Line, working out in the sun all day, to the point where I actually did end up getting sunstroke and got written up for calling out. I did give a doctor's note and all that stuff, so at that point I decided to resign. But being that my hours were 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and I had split days off, spending time with my friends outside of work, and even my girlfriend at the time, was just hard. Like, I came home and just didn't want to move. You know, I was sunburned all the time. I got more vitamin D than I knew what to do with. But I was just, I don't know, like, I was completely unhappy. And I remember there were a few days, actually, where, I mean, for lunch they fed us, actually, because they had a partnership with World Yacht Corporation. So we got to go to the employee boat, which was just a yacht, and we would have like an employee buffet, you know, but basically like a family meal thing, like tuna salads, nothing fancy. But I don't know about you guys. If you are, by the way, the cat's here. If you are out in the sun all day, I think tuna salad with a lot of mayonnaise is like the last possible thing you want to eat. Especially since, at least for me, it just seems disgusting. So I ended up eating, truthfully, most of the time, dried pineapples and ices. Like, full-blown, like, you know, with the wooden spoon thing. That's what I would eat. I would get a sugar rush for the afternoon just to get through it. And then when I went home at night, I just didn't want to move, you know? I was eating a lot of Chinese food, Americanized Chinese food again. My diet really wasn't all that great, and I wasn't working out. I was kind of just sitting out in the sun, but I stayed kind of lean just because I was sweating all the time. But overall, health-wise, was just no good. So what did I do to kill time and try to decompress a little bit after work? I'd play Final Fantasy XI. Sitting in air conditioning, shade, I'd wear a hoodie. Like, I wanted nothing to do with the sun. I was absolutely miserable. And even my parents were like, to an extent, like, this is his first job. Like, summer job, it's seasonal. It's more of a manual thing than he's probably used to. So, of course, he's going to bitch and moan and complain, just as I am right now. But when I did get sunstroke, that's when my mom was like, okay, actually, maybe this is a little bit legit here. And then when I resigned, they were both like, you know, fine, whatever. But playing Final Fantasy XI is really where I got some of that social interaction. I returned to the server I was originally on with my newly created character, Valsender, but I wanted to not play Dragoon. At this point, I wanted to do something I usually had not done in terms of video game class. Usually, up until then, like with your Diablos and stuff, I always just played a character that hits stuff. I didn't really go into magic. I didn't go into something with a little bit more nuance to it or anything like that. But I also remembered how much of a time commitment that playing this game took in terms of leveling up once you reach a certain point. So I decided to level Thief. Now, why is that? Honestly, it was something I'd never played before. In any RPG, tabletop, CRPG, or otherwise. Never played one. And what really intrigued me about this was thieves had naturally high evasion, and at the time, I was reading about all these different combinations. Thief, sub, ninja. Now that I had access to all these other things and could level them up and whatnot, Thief Sub Ninja could pretty much solo anything as long as they had, you know, shadows. So, ninjas had an ability known as Utsumi, and there was 2 versions. There was Ichi, which means 1, and Ni, which means 2. Basically creating shadows so you would get free hits, and with a thief coupled with high evasion, you could potentially never get hit. Sounds like a good solo class to me. Yeah, the catch is you have to be like level 75 to have access to both of the shadow spells. But regardless, I decided I was going to level up Thief. And I quickly discovered that Thief, despite the evasion, really doesn't evade all that much in the beginning because your evasion skill has to actively level up with you. And the only way to do that is to actually evade stuff. So depending on the monsters you were fighting, sometimes you would see, hey, your evasion skill went up 0.1. I think one time I saw a 0.8 because I dodged like Leaping Lizzie, who was yet another notorious monster who dropped Leaping Lizzie boots, which were the premier boots for thieves, with 3 dexterity and 3 agility, the 2 most important stats for a thief. And of course, Leaping Lizzie was in a beginning area, the boots were level 7, and you would have people level 75 still rocking those boots. So I decided, okay, cool, I am going to try to get Leaping Lizzie boots for my thief. And that's when I discovered something else that had changed within the realm of Final Fantasy XI during my time away. Real money trading. If you've never played an MMO, or you did play an MMO back in the day, you're probably familiar with all those websites that popped up around that time where you could foreseeably charge or pay money, and then somebody randomly on your server would either meet you and give you money, in-game currency, or mail you in-game currency. And this was really, really bad in Final Fantasy XI at this point. There were real money traders everywhere, and they came from a particular country. I'm not going to say what because truthfully it's kind of racist if you ask me, but by association that's kind of where it went, and they were involved in every aspect of the economy. They were hunting notorious monsters, they were using bots to claim them, they were keeping all the drops themselves. Some folks in some organizations were a little bit more organized, and they would actually level up crafting and claim monopolies on stuff like the elemental staves, which you would need later on as a black mage, or the elemental rings, which you would need as almost every class, or scorpion harnesses for that mid-game ninja and thief that needed the accuracy and the evasion, as well as some monsters are notorious monsters that dropped other rare drops like the Peacock Charm, which gave you 10 accuracy, and Sniper Rings, which gave you 5 accuracy per ring, which was a thing not heard of. And eventually, Square would make crafted versions and rare exclusive versions of these drops, meaning it dropped to you, it was bound to your account, and you couldn't sell it. That was how they worked around the real money trading, I guess you could say, organizations that were going on during this time. But it was a massive undertaking because they had to go through every single notorious monster, and they had to come up with new ideas to make it difficult enough where a computer couldn't foreseeably do it in place of an actual person. And this was bad. I am talking, I would get to the Leaping Lizzie area and there would be about 10 or 15 people just standing there, not moving at all. And then Lizzie would pop, and it would pop purple, meaning it already popped claimed by somebody. And you would just watch all 10 to 15 of these characters just go in unison because it was an algorithm or a script that was running in the background. It was really bad, and it made for leveling. It made it very difficult in leveling up because to get Leaping Lizzie to spawn, you had to kill the other lizards. So now you couldn't even XP over there. So you had no choice but to move into another area, which had higher level monsters, which is how my evasion got so high right at the start because I had no choice. And leveling up Thief was really hard. You weren't the first person to be picked for parties. You were truthfully the last person right at the start because you used daggers and your damage wasn't as high. But then you fought stuff like bats and flies and birds, and your damage went through the roof, and all of a sudden everybody wanted thieves. But ultimately, thieves were like bottom rung of bottom rung in terms of a DPS class. So leveling it up took a while, but the advantage I had this time was I had a friend who was a higher level, and he was a red mage, so he was always in demand for XP parties and all that stuff. So he helped me with doing all my sub job unlocks and all that fun stuff. So I was able to get my thief up to, I guess you could say, the mid game area of Juno, where I previously was as a Dragoon. And since I was leveling up Thief, I didn't have to unlock an advanced class job. I did Ninja specifically because I would eventually need to have Ninja leveled up. I also leveled up Warrior because I would eventually need to have that leveled up as well for sub-job purposes. And then, in Juno, rinse and repeat the cycle. Because I was at work a majority of the time for like that month and a half or so, the buddy who I had who helped me get all my sub jobs and stuff like that, I rarely ever saw him. And he didn't play every single day. He had other stuff to do. And unlike me, he was actually able to separate his personal life with the MMO. So he would go out with his girlfriend and all this other stuff. And then when he popped on, I'd be like, oh, can you help me do stuff? But then, he wants to play himself. So I spent a lot of time standing in Port Juno with my looking for group flag up. And then one fateful day, I get a tell, which is a direct message, from a paladin named Pupile. And he's out leveling in Garlaj Citadel, and which has bats and beetles and all that fun stuff. He messages me, hey, I have an XP group here. Somebody already left. I need a substitute for DPS. Are you interested? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So I get on Chocobo and I head right over. Little did I know that this party, that this, I'm presuming Paladin, had started up, would become my static XP group for the better half of a year. What is a static XP group? Basically, for lack of a better word, it's a group you always party with. So we had a white mage, Kedari. We had a red mage. We had a ranger who eventually left, and then we got a random substitute. We have Pupile as paladin and myself as thief. Now, I didn't realize it at the time because I was just excited to have a party. He actually wanted a thief in the party because in terms of tanking, he really enjoyed it, but thief was able to displace enmity and put it back onto a tank. So by me being there, I actually helped him using what was called his trick attack. So we were doing this, I think, maybe once or twice a week. We would coordinate a time, and he was out of Colorado. So, of course, he was a work from home project manager, I think. And he would schedule everything out. He would arrange everything. And then once we reached a certain level, I think we were about 40-ish, I think, that's when he was like, hey guys, would you be interested in doing the story of this game too? I was like, story? There's a story to this fucking thing? I thought we were just grinding all day. Little did I know, the white mage Kedari, who I attribute this to the end of days, she and I became very close friends. And she was also relatively close to my age. I think she was a little bit older though. And she had a full-time job, and she was married young, so she was very wise. I always say she was probably the wisest person. And she had a very heavy southern drawl, so you never, ever, ever wanted to make her upset. But she had played EverQuest and all this stuff, and she's like, no, there's like full-blown storylines for each of the nations. There's a whole arc about the Xylart and all this stuff. And all of a sudden, this XP grinding static all of a sudden became, for lack of a better word, and I'll say it this way, a D&D group. We would get together with an objective of doing like one or two story missions like once or twice a week. And this would be like an event. We would schedule it. We would all make it a point to have dinner beforehand. We would do a recap of where we were in the story. Like, it was so much fun. And we did this for all of Bastock, I believe, all of Sandoria, all of Windhurst, and then we went through the entire Rise of the Xylart storyline. And this would go on until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And we were XPing on top of it. It was such a freaking blast. This is where an MMO becomes addictive. Because now, in a situation I was in, I was not getting any of that social interaction I was used to getting as outside. And when I finally quit that job, I already had outside commitments. Oh, Alex, let's hang out. Nah, Thursday, 7 o'clock. I got to go to, Rulo Gardens because I got to meet up with this guy and the other thing to help him get papyrus paper so that he can go fight Matt. That's what it turned into. It turned into, for lack of a better word, a job. But the thing is, we were having so much fun. And then one day, our static red mage wasn't able to make it. He had just had a kid, I think. And he was like, listen, I'm going to be out for a while. So my buddy, my real life buddy, happened to be a red mage. And I was like, hey, are you relatively close to our level? We're going to be going out grinding. Do you want to come? And now all of us are friends. And now I have an outside perspective too. And now when he and I are hanging out, once my schedule opened up a bit, we're talking about Final Fantasy XI all the time. And we're also talking about, because we're getting there, endgame. And endgame basically means you've exhausted all the story content, presumably. You've maxed out your character. And now you go and you face world bosses. You fight notorious monsters with strange conditions to make them appear. And he was very interested in that. Or as I always like to say, fighting the big shit. He was always very interested in that. I played a thief. I pretty much resigned myself to never, ever taking place in any of that stuff. Because as a thief, you're the least demand. A thief has one ability that you need in endgame, which is Treasure Hunter. And unless you have a thief knife, which gives you Treasure Hunter +1, nobody gave a shit. So at this point, we're all sufficiently leveled. We're close to the level cap. We've done a ton of story content. And now we just get together and just bullshit around. We just talk all day. And we socialize and, we grind and we help each other, like farm for Gil. All this other stuff, dealing with real money traders and all that stuff, and being general pain in the ass bullshit. And it's around this time, once we started to get into the later levels, we made friends with a Dark Knight named Eladrim. And Eladrim was a fellow metalhead. And he got the idea in his head of, what if we started to make parties that went against convention? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, our party, we had no black mage. At this point, it was just a red mage, a white mage, a paladin, me as a thief, another DPS, and a dark knight. And he's like, no, like, what if we use the thief abilities of trick attacking off of each other? And we created this very strange, like, XP system where Pupile just had to basically be a DPS. And we would just bounce the aggro back and forth. He never got hit. Kadari would fall asleep. She even said, she's like, man, this is freaking boring. I don't have to do anything. And that's when we discovered that this game, truthfully, allowed you to experiment. Despite what the Brady Guide said, which was notorious for being completely inaccurate, saying a paladin sub black mage was the best combination in the whole game. But we discovered that you didn't have to adhere to the rules of Final Fantasy XI. You could play with it. And now we're at the end game, and we're playing with it full blast. I am soloing stuff as Thief sub Ninja. I soloed Aquarius, which was a crab boss, did it all by myself. And now we're bored. We have nothing else to do. We literally did everything. We could join an endgame link shell. We could stick with our current link shell. Or, and this is where the addiction once again feeds in, we can level up other jobs. And we enjoyed staticking so much. We were like, okay, let's all level up new jobs. Let's pick different jobs and do the whole thing all over again. So our red mage decided he was going to do black mage. Eladrim wanted to do black mage. Kadari decided she was going to do, I think she wanted to do summoner at the time. And that dropped off, and I think she ended up doing red mage instead. I decided to go ranger because, once again, more damage is good damage. And Pupile, I think he was doing ninja because he just liked tanking. And that's where we kind of hit a snag. Not because we weren't being creative and having fun, but we had a taste of, like, that end game stuff, not really end game, like level cap stuff. We didn't have the best gear anymore. We never had the best gear in the first place, but we had worse gear. The gear that we sold to get the better gear, we had to rebuy. And that's where it turns into a little bit of a weird hoarding game, because now you're like, I don't know if I'm ever going to level up this job or this, that, or the other thing. So I'm just going to keep everything. As a matter of fact, by the time I left Final Fantasy XI, I maxed out to level 75, which was the level cap at the time. Now remember, I said this was a grind. I got Thief to 75. I got Ranger to 75. I got Warrior to 75. I got Bard to 75. I got Paladin to 75. And I got Black Mage to 75. And I was already working on getting Samurai to level 50. That's a lot of time. That is a lot of time. And I had every job at least level 37 for purposes of sub-job. And those weird combinations would come up later on in the end game, but I didn't know it yet. So now we're leveling up all this stuff on our own, and at this point, the US has really started to catch up to where Japan is in terms of the end game content. You know, notorious monsters like, and I'm just dropping names in case anybody remembers, like Simurgh and Rock and Circuit, were all being camped by Americans now. The Japanese didn't have a monopoly on all this stuff anymore. You know, I remember walking through Saint-Laurent-Champagne and bumping into Simurgh. Huge bird, just out of nowhere. And swarms of people running, throwing bows, shooting arrows, provoking, throwing magic at it. And it just spinning in circles and making tornadoes appear out of it, and people missing it like crazy. And then it falls down and you see people cheering because it dropped the boots, which gave you a 12% movement bonus. And I was like, man, you know, this is cool. But how do you even get involved in something like this? Like, where do you even start? Like, who do you talk to get involved with this stuff? Again, I was a thief. Main job. Very low demand. Ironically, at around this time, because we were doing our static second jobs and all that stuff, from time to time, Kadari liked to play White Mage just to keep her skills up. She enjoyed it. She really found it fun. So she was grinding out with a Paladin and some other folks. And the Paladin said, hey, I'm thinking about starting up an endgame Link show. Would you be interested in joining up? You're pretty good. And she was like, yeah, definitely. Like, she'd always been interested in it. And, you know, she was like, I'm also interested in doing all the story content too. And he's like, well, you know, we can make like subgroups and all that stuff. And she said, is it cool if my static party joins up? And he said, okay, well, what jobs do you have? And she told him. And he was like, yeah, sure. Like, we don't actually like have anything set in stone yet. So more the merrier, I say. You know, so far we have 2 members, me and a ranger named Igus. Not Igus as persona, Igus, I-G-A-C-E. And she was like, okay. So then she comes back and messages me, hey, Al, I got an invite to an endgame Link show. And I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. Because I had never even thought about it. I actually applied to one on a website. And basically they said, what jobs do you have at 75? I said thief. And never heard back, of course. Little did I know I'd become friends with all those guys later on. But she was like, well, I was like, yeah, but I'm a thief. She was like, no, they don't have one. So it's all yours. You'd be the only thief. We would get more eventually. But I was like, okay, cool. So I get the Link shell. And the Link shell is named Tactics. And I was like, Tactics? Like Final Fantasy Tactics? Sure enough, yeah, that's what it was named after. And our fearless leader of the Canuckian dictatorship, he was from Canada, Rusty Blade, was the one who would fearlessly lead us into battle on every occasion. And Rusty was probably one of like the most chill people I have ever interacted with online. He was very smart. He knew how to play Paladin. He knew how to play his job well. He eventually leveled up Red Mage. He knew how to play any class he touched. He knew exactly what to do. He was very intelligent about it. But he was also very respectful, and he was also very accommodating. He wanted everybody to have fun. That was his whole thing. And he was a very good leader, which I eventually found out he was in bands and all this stuff, and he organized gigs. Like, this was in his blood. So the fact of him starting up an Endgame Link Shell was just once again him trying to stretch his managerial muscles. So here we are, there's 8 of us to start. My group of 5, Rusty, Igus, and then my real life buddy who I coaxed into joining up. And he's like, all right, cool. We're going to go fight Rock. And we're all like, okay, how do we fight Rock? And he's like, oh, there's pop conditions. We're like, pop conditions? Rock would only spawn every couple of days. And during that time, whenever Rock actually died, it could respawn anywhere between 1 to 3 hours. 1 minute to 3 hours between its time of death. So that way it was constantly moving. So we stood around for 3 fucking hours, and we didn't get the claim on it. At all. And we were like, oh, okay, that was very anticlimactic. And he's like, it's okay, because Behemoth is going to pop. And we're like, okay. And we all ran over to Behemoth, all excited. We're like, okay, cool, when's it supposed to come? He's like, 3 hours from now. We're like, okay. And we stood around for another 3 hours. 6 hours. 6 hours. And Behemoth didn't even pop. King Behemoth popped. King Behemoth. If any Final Fantasy fan knows a Behemoth. King Behemoth was massive. It took up the whole screen. When you fought King Behemoth, you either saw its foot or its head, and nothing else. And randomly, it would cast Meteor. And guess what? Meteor hit everything. People dying left and right. Because Behemoth's Dominion was essentially just a giant circle. And the only way you could fight King Behemoth at the time was kiting it. Or as I used to call it, marathoning it. Basically, getting all of its enmity and then having it chase you around while everybody else whacked it with sticks and shot magic at it. So we weren't getting claims, because we were dealing with bots and everything else. And everybody was like, okay, cool. They're joining the link shells that get the claims. We weren't getting any. So for lack of a better word, we kind of went with, and this is going to sound terrible, the bottom rung people, not the best geared people. We were going for the folks that got rejected by everywhere else. And that's the beautiful thing about it. These people I considered family for the longest time, because we saw each other. We were all the same age group, 18 to 24, 25, and we had one woman who joined up with us. She was in her 40s, and she played this game because she was on disability, and she acted kind of like the mom of the group, like making sure to we were all okay and whatnot. And we didn't use a Discord or anything like that because it didn't exist. We used TeamSpeak. And she would get on and, she would console us. She'd be like, oh, it's not that big a deal. Don't worry about it. It'll all work out. She'd be like, Al, you're in college, right? I'm like, yeah. She's like, do you know what you want to study yet? And I'm like, no, not yet. And, she was just like, it's okay. One day it'll all click. Don't worry about it. If you have any questions about, I have 2 kids I put through college. Just ask. This was beautiful. To an extent, why do you need real friends? Real friends as in the physical sense. I would log in just to talk to people. It reached a point where I wasn't going outside as much anymore. I'd go out once a day. That was my rule. I would go out, I would get a 2-liter bottle of water, I'd make sure to drink the whole thing, and I would walk maybe the equivalent of I'll say 25, 30 blocks. Was it healthy? No. Did I get some physical activity? Sure. Was I getting social interaction? Yeah. But my parents didn't understand it because I still lived at home. He doesn't really go out. He doesn't hang out with his friends anymore. I was with my friends all the time. And as the link shell got bigger, we got people in different time zones. That's when we started to get folks from Europe because Rusty made a big push. He made a big push. We have to have 24-hour coverage at all times just in case something pops so we can get it. But here's the kicker. We hadn't actually claimed a fucking thing in 2 months. We would all stand around there for hours hoping for the day we would finally get something. And nobody wanted to bend bend down and actually get a bot or anything like that because nobody wanted to get banned. Everybody had put so many hours into their characters, they were afraid. And some jobs and some people in the link shell, again, we were friends first, just didn't mesh. You know, we could show up to an NM fight, a Notorious Monster fight, with 10 Dark Knights. Do you think we're going to actually try to fight the thing with 10 Dark Knights? It makes no sense. Everybody dropped dead. So people like Eladrim leveled up Black Mage. You know, now people are starting to level up stuff to be more useful to the group because we want to do the endgame content. And it was very hard at the start, considering we were, for lack of a better word, the bottom rung of the bottom rung. And then it happened one day. We claimed Simurgh. Out of nowhere, we all panicked. Nobody knew what to do. People were 2 hour. It looked like a shit show. Rusty busted an invincible. I'm poking it with daggers. 2 damage. Everybody's missing like crazy. Horrible. The idea of getting gear to actually play really came into effect here because nobody was able to touch the fucking thing and we nearly wiped out. And it was embarrassing because at that point, by us nearly wiping out, the question is, do we let it go unclaimed and let somebody else take it, presumably one of the real money trading people, or do we call for help, which voids out any drop that anybody can get? We called for help, which is embarrassing because that was like an unwritten don't ever fucking do that rule. And I would say we got cursed at in Japanese. We got cursed at in English, definitely in English. People were shouting, bunch of noobs, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Terrible, terrible first outing. And we were all embarrassed. We didn't know what to make of it. And it was disheartening to a lot of people, and a bunch of people actually quit the link shell at that point because they were just like, no, I can't be associated with this. Bunch of folks like I didn't really ever talk to anyway, but it was unfortunate because at that point, what few of us remained, we basically stuck around just because we liked hanging out with each other and leveling and all that stuff. But everybody was really disappointed. You know, at this point, Poupley also had a baby, so he kind of faded off into the distance. I was starting to go back to school, so I wasn't on as much. Kadari, she worked at a fast food chain as a manager, and her hours, I think, got shifted at the time. So she wasn't around as much either. It was at that point that we all kind of decided at that point, Rusty was disheartened too. But, you know, this was his baby. This was his brainchild. You know, he was the lead paladin. He was the lead tank. He was not going to go down without... He was fully prepared to go down with his ship. And he basically said, if anybody wants to leave, no harm, no foul. I realized, like, the first outing really wasn't all that great. I think we can do better. But I totally get it. And like I said, a bunch of people left. A bunch of us stayed, myself included. But this is where we really started to hunker down and really take endgame a bit more seriously. My real life buddy, he was actually almost actively recruited for the number 2 link shell on the server. Number 1 was a Japanese group called Word. Or Wabu, I think it was. It was one or the other. And Palpatine, my old buddy from back in the day, he was on that number 2 link shell as well. And, you know, I would ask him about stuff like that, and, you know, he would just tell me, oh, you know, sometimes you have to use unscrupulous means in order to get the claims. And he was a bard, so he was, like, number 1 import person at the time. And, you know, he remembered me from my old character, and, you know, he'd be like, why'd you level up Thief instead of Dragoon? And I was like, I want to change the pace. He's like, well, you know, Thief isn't really that great endgame. Ultimately, this is all very discouraging. So I decided to level up Ranger, because I could foreseeably do a shit ton of damage. And then eventually Ranger got nerfed, so there went that idea. But I enjoyed playing Ranger. I always thought it was fun. But now we're going to be a bit more serious, and my buddy, he decides he is really going to become like consigliere to Rusty. and advise him on the best way to run this link shell, or at least give him tools to be able to move forward. And that ultimately is what got us to get our second claim and our first set of drops, which was incredible in terms of motivation. The first monster we actually killed was Simurg. We went back and we got revenge on that motherfucker the first time we went out after that first initial snafu. We didn't get any drops, but it didn't matter. The victory and the claim itself meant it was worth its weight in gold, because now we were legitimate. We were able to fight it. We didn't all die, and even though we weren't able to get any drops, we were just excited at the fact that we were able to get the title, because every time you defeated a notorious monster, you got a title to go with it, like Simurg Smasher, or Rock Remonstrator, or Nidog Nemisator, or something like stupid alliteration titles. And it meant the world to us at the time. And now people that left wanted to come back because they saw us as legitimate. Mind you, we only killed one fucking thing. And now, because we have all these people trying to come in and messaging Rusty and all this stuff, now we have to make this a little bit more legitimate. You know, we can't be running this out of the garage at this point. And we made a website. And Aegis, out of the kindness of his heart, fronted all of the Dominion fees himself, because it really wasn't that expensive. And he built us an initial website with a recruitment page and a small forum. And we had categories like real life fun stuff, other hobbies, pets, introduce yourself. You know, we all put up pictures of ourselves. And, you know, we would just all talk and interact. It was very strange. We talk in game, then we go, oh, I posted on the forum. And we'd be like, oh, let me log out and go on the forum and all this stuff. It made absolutely no freaking sense, but we were having a blast doing all this. And then the first big blow to the link shell came up. After he fronted all the Dominion, all the domain stuff and all that and whatnot, I just had to leave. And by leave, I mean he left the game altogether. Real life was becoming too much and too important for him to spend time on an MMO. And to make sure he never came back, he basically parceled out his gear to make sure that he would never be tempted. Some stuff he couldn't trade because it was rare exclusive, meaning it was bound to his account. But when I logged in one day, I had a pair of Strider boots in my mailbox, which was that same 12% movement bonus that from the Simurg that we never got. And I was like, wait a minute, where did he get this from? He was originally part of the #1 link shell because he was like one of the top rangers, and he left because he had connected with Rusty so much, and he connected with all of us on an, I guess you could say, not on an emotional level, but on a level of friendship. He realized how close we all were. We were just excited to be a part of all this. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't a grind, it wasn't work. And the crazy thing is, he paid for that website for, I think, 8 years after he left the game. And he would chime in on the forums all the time, congrats, this, that, the other thing. And then on the day when he's like, listen, guys, you know, it's getting too expensive to front this thing anymore, we all PayPal'd him money. And he probably got more money than he needed, but it didn't matter. He upgraded everything. He took care of that website like you wouldn't believe. And I think that was really the important thing at, I guess you could say, this middle level of Final Fantasy XI, and where that addiction really comes in. Because there's a sense of familiarity, there's a sense of friendship, there's a sense of participating in activity. And I think that's why some people really get into social gaming and board games and tabletop and all that stuff, because there's a degree of social interaction and there's a degree of common ground. And mind you, when you have folks from all different walks of life and different age categories and folks that you may have never spoken to normally, it makes it really fun and cool. One of my closest friends on this game was a woman who lived out of Virginia and was married and everything else. One of my other closest friends in this game was a 13-year-old who truthfully was smarter than he should have been, because he was in a gifted program at school because of his intelligence. And he played this game because everybody just looked at him as a study thing. You know, he was supposed to go to college at like 15 or something like that. And he was like, I just play this so I can be dumb. You know, I just want to be a dumb kid. And he didn't have that. And then I had another person, you know, in Eladrim who worked graveyard shift in Las Vegas. And he was a metalhead. So we talk about that. And when he was on, everybody was asleep. But I was there. And we would talk and we would hang out and we'd play other games and all this stuff. And then you would meet those people randomly in a party that you would just connect with on so many different levels. And that's how I made one of my other close friends in this game, where we would just try to one-up each other. Not to say you were better, but just to say, like, hey, watch this, let's see if this actually works. And basically push the limits of the game. And then the second expansion for Final Fantasy XI came out. And now we were on a ground where we were doing some endgame, we were leveling up other stuff, and there was a brilliant new storyline in the Chains of Promethea that was coming up. And now it wasn't just my old static group, it was a whole Link shell. And I remember Rusty was like, we're doing this story, guys. We're doing this as a group. We're doing this as a Link shell. And we would do this maybe 3 or 4 times with just running everybody through it. And it was so much fun. I must have done that final boss fight 10 times. And now, not only does our Link shell do endgame, not only are we getting claims, not only are we fighting the lower tier stuffs, Rock, Simberg, Circuit. Who was the other one we used to do? We used to do Behemoth. We weren't up to King Behemoth yet. We weren't able to take him on. We would try to fight Fafnir. That was a little, that was a little shaky to start. But we were getting there, and we were getting drops now, and we were becoming legitimate. But we also advertised as a Link shell that did storyline content. So if you were into that, you didn't have to participate in the fights. Just know you're not going to get drops. But then we discovered Dynamis. And this is where stuff in this Link shell starts to go a little off the rails. Because we had our hands in so many things, and there's only so many hours in a day, and only so many days in a week, that the time sync now added another time sync, and then added another time sync. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it for today. If you enjoy these, of course, keep watching them. And then the next part will cover more endgame stuff, as well as a little bit into the what I like to call extracurricular activities of Final Fantasy XI. I've been Alex, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.